Learning jazz standards is an important part of learning jazz. You're really learning the tradition of the music and how to really cement all the techniques and transcription that you learn together. Obviously, when you hear someone playing the standard, you're hearing them demonstrate scales, rhythms, and language which they have learned through transcription. So those that study with me will know what a big advocate I am of learning how to play jazz standards. So if you are new to jazz, I already have recorded a video which gives you 3 must-know beginner jazz standards. You can check that out. I've listed and linked that in the description below. But this video aims to kind of give you my personal story of how I learned jazz through learning some standards. So really what I've done is I've took 5 which I feel like I've learned a lot from, and I've ranked them in order from beginner, easier tunes going to more intermediate and advanced standards to give you an idea of my personal journey. And each of these standards, I've got some footage of me playing them, and I've tried to mix it up to keep it interesting. So some of the demonstrations of the standards from myself are like live gigs, some are just me at home playing, just to give you an idea of what you can do with some of these tunes. So let's get on with the list, shall we? So the first jazz standard which I'd like to talk about is Take the A Train by Billy Strayhorn and Duke Ellington. This is an old swing tune, and I think it's a tremendous tune that you can start learning with if you are new to jazz, because it's not too complex to learn really. It's an AABA chord form, it's 32 bars, and if you look at the actual chords, it never really goes too far away from the key of C. So like even the bridge goes up a fourth, so it's in F, and you have that funny chord in bar 3, the D7. Some people call that a D7 sharp 5 because it has that A flat in the melody note. But the great thing about this tune is that you don't have to necessarily reference that chord. Of course you can do if you want. You can play a whole tone scale or something like that because that has the sharp 5 in, and you can really treat the chord as being something different. But when you're just getting started with jazz guitar, you can essentially treat that D7 chord as an A minor. An A minor is an awful lot like C major. So basically, you know, it's one of those tunes that for me, when I first started learning to play, was quite easy and accessible, because really my ear was not trained to kind of hear some of the modulations that jazz music has, like, you know, semitones, and especially the modulations which take it out of the key. So just to complete this first jazz standard, here's a little bit of me playing Take the A Train from a duo gig recorded 3 or 4 years ago at the time of recording of this video. I hope you enjoy it. Okay, so the second standard which I would like to talk about in this list is a little bit more difficult than Take the A Train initially. Of course, many of these standards you can make them as simple as you want them or as advanced as you want them, but the standard which I'm going to talk about now is the jazz blues progression. So me personally, I came from a background of playing blues and rock, so I love playing minor pentatonic runs, blues scale runs. All this was very much part of my language before I began playing jazz, and I think that if you are new to jazz and you hear someone like John Coltrane or Bill Evans, as great as those players are, I think as a blues or a rock player it can almost seem a bit off-putting because you can't really relate to a lot of what they're doing initially. But if you check out the jazz blues, and especially players playing a jazz blues such as Charlie Parker, Grant Green, Kenny Burrell, you often hear a lot of blues scale and pentatonic runs mixed in with bebop. So I think it's a really good accessible standard that you can check out if you're fairly new to playing jazz. So here is a short piece of film of me playing a jazz blues from earlier this year. It was a few months ago, back when we could still go out and play gigs. So here's a short clip of me playing a few choruses of a jazz blues now, and hopefully from this you'll kind of hear what I'm talking about. I guess in this solo I'm trying to reference a few traditional blues ideas, but I'm also trying to get a few bebop lines in there as well. So I hope you enjoy this clip. Okay, so the next jazz standard which I'd like to talk about is James or Jimmy Van Heusen's standard Polkadots and Moombeams. Now, Jimmy Van Heusen is probably one of my favourite American composers. There's much of his music which I like to play, and many of his jazz standards really work well for solo jazz guitar arrangements. Of course, he also wrote the standard Damn That Dream, and in my other video, 5 must-know chord melody guitar pieces, that was one of my top 5 chord melody guitar pieces. But the piece I'm talking about here is Polkadots and Moombeams. And by the way, if you check this tune out, if you check out a lyrical version, I have to apologise in advance because the lyrics are absolutely dreadful. They're very cheesy, and it's probably some of the worst lyrics I've ever heard. But the actual melody itself sounds wonderful, and the chord progression sounds fantastic. And there's a bunch of things that I personally learned from this when it comes to solo jazz arrangements, because for example, the start of the melody line ascends, but through that you can add descending chord motion, which is demonstrated in the video clip that's going to come shortly after this. And there's all sorts of reharmonizations and things you can do with this standard. It basically fits really well as a solo guitar piece because of all the challenges within it. And you know, you can, even if you were to just play this one from a lead sheet and you just played it as a simple chord melody piece, it would sound great. But beyond that, you can add reharmonizations and change things, and it's just one of my personal, even now it's one of my favourite standards which you can play. So here's some footage of me playing a little bit of Polkadots and Moombeams from a few years ago in a bit of a solo guitar context. I think this was part of a lesson demonstration, so I hope you enjoy this Okay, so the next performance, or the next standard which I'm going to discuss, is Stella by Starlight by Victor Young. This standard, I think, is a little bit more challenging, so if you are completely new to jazz, then I don't recommend diving straight in with this one. There's much more key changes, and I think there's almost a new chord in every single bar of the song. if you are new to jazz, what I do recommend is checking out my beginner jazz guitar guide, which is linked and listed in the description below. That has some exercises and standards which I really recommend diving into if you're completely fresh to jazz and jazz guitar. But Stella by Starlight, for those of you that have been playing a while, if you're looking to get your fingers into something that's a little bit more challenging, this is a great one to check out. There's backdoor, 2/5s, there's some complex chord changes that you can solo over, and it makes for a wonderful solo guitar piece as well. And this is one that I've really enjoyed doing all kinds of things with. I think that even just recently I've learned a few substitutions that I can apply over this tune to make it sound a little bit more interesting. So to conclude this segment, I'm going to show you a short clip of me playing the first part of this song, again another home performance, so you can hear what a nice solo jazz guitar piece this makes. And that's Stella by Starlight by Victor Young. Okay, so the final jazz standard which I'd like to talk about in this video is by far the most difficult and the most challenging, and I guess there's a little bit of a funny story about this one. So the jazz progression that I'm talking about is the rhythm changes, and of course that's a generic progression. So many jazz standards use this chord progression. So Anthropology by Charlie Parker, Lester Leaps In by Lester Young, Rhythming by Thelonious Monk, and even the Flintstones theme uses this chord progression as well. So it's it's used in a bunch of standards, so it's really well worth you learning, especially if you're an intermediate or an advanced player. It's worth getting your fingers stuck into. So I guess the funny story with me learning this is that it was one of those tunes that to play it properly I put it off for years, because if you look at the chord progression now, you'll see that in every single bar there is, well, every single bar of the A sections there's 2 chords, and like I said, if you are new, that can seem quite overwhelming. Of course, you can get away by playing from the key centre for the A sections, which is cool, and that's a nice mix in the grand scheme of things, but to really get this one under your belt, you want to be able to really play through the changes so that you address each chord. Of course, there's a Joe Pass etude. If you just type in Joe Pass rhythm changes, an 8th note etude, which is a great demonstration of this really. So what I've done, if you are looking to improvise over this, I wrote 2 etudes myself over this progression, which I think, which I wanted to compose for my students who are dealing with this as well. So the video for this one is basically a full 8th note etude going over all the chord changes. So I think it's a great test, you know, if you could maybe improvising over tunes with 2 or 3 key centers, and you're really wanting to brush up your bebop chops and brush up your technique, then getting stuck into your rhythm changes is a fantastic thing for you to work on, and it's one that's certainly helped me and shaped my musical language and identity as a player. So let's go to a short etude of me playing over a rhythm changes now to give you an idea of what that sounds like. Okay, so these are the 5 jazz standards which I feel like I've learnt a lot from. What 5 jazz standards do you think that you've learnt a lot about jazz from? Please share your thoughts in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit the like button, and if you like more free content like this, then please subscribe to this channel.